What's on your radar, Kim?
Well, it's bad news for Biden. A new poll released exclusively on the Hill shows if the presidential election were held today, Trump would beat Biden and would once again occupy the White House. The Harvard Caps Harris poll shows Trump getting 47% support compared to Biden's 41%, with 12% undecided. Mark Penn, the co-director of the Harvard Caps Harris poll survey, said this has more to do with Biden being disliked than Trump being loved. Could you imagine being so disliked that over you, voters prefer the guy who lied about his inauguration crowd size, tried to ban TikTok, grabbed them by the locked kids in cages, ripped children away from their parents at the border, called far-right protesters very fine people, imposed the Muslim travel ban, wouldn't show us his tax returns, denied Russian meddling in the election, called political opponents names like Pocahontas, tried to buy Greenland, called John McCain a loser, withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, called certain countries holes, blamed Ukraine and not Russia for election meddling, sprayed Black Lives Matters protesters with tear gas for a photo op, denied the election results, led the charge to put 5 teenagers to death, questioned Obama's birthplace, paid off a porn star and a Playboy model, called Mexican immigrants rapists and murderers, told Proud Boys to stand down and stand by, wrote love letters to Kim Jong-un, told Russia if they were listening to hack Hillary's emails, called COVID the China virus, held super spreader events during the height of the pandemic, deported 59,000 Haitians with protective status, used ICE as his personal Gestapo to break up families, mocked a disabled reporter, obstructed the Mueller investigation, pardoned his pals, pressured Zelensky to investigate the Bidens, incited an insurrection, was impeached twice, and according to the Post, lied 30,573 times. Could you imagine that guy being more popular than you? Now, just to be clear, I don't believe all of the things on this list. Some are true, some are exaggerated or taken out of context. And these were just a few of the many things we were fed over and over about Trump during the 4 years of his presidency. The news media hasn't, under any stretch of the imagination, given Joe Biden the same treatment they gave Trump. Though there is much to investigate and criticize Biden for, the news media largely ignores it. And yet, the voters, according to this poll, would still choose Trump over Biden. Now, what does this tell us? It tells us most people don't care about the morals or character of the president in office as much as they care about the economy. Mean tweets, name calling, lacking the typical political polish doesn't mean as much to people as their bank accounts. All of the controversy surrounding Trump was good for keeping eyeballs glued to the news, which was certainly good for their bank accounts. But the scandals Beltway insiders were clutching their pearls over didn't actually affect people in their day-to-day lives. For the most part, reading about Trump's antics was no different than people reading gossip in tabloids. It was shocking, made people upset, but when they went home, their lives were largely unaffected. In fact, under Trump, not necessarily because of anything he did or didn't do in particular, but up until the pandemic, people were doing better economically than they had been for a while. Now, with inflation out of control, people are paying significant increases for things like bread, meat, vegetables, used cars, and of course, gasoline. Rent is increasing. Student loan interest payments are about to start up again. People are going back to work. Kids are back in school. But with gasoline so high, the commute costs are stressing families out. The liberal media keeps telling us the economy is booming. It's growing at its fastest rate since 1987, with unemployment down and job growth up. But it just feels like the latest round of gaslighting. Americans are poorer today than they were yesterday, and they're letting the president know by giving him his lowest approval ratings yet, according to the latest NBC News poll. And they're even signaling they'd rather put up with foul-mouthed Trump than suffer another day worrying about their financial future, according to this latest Harvard Caps Harris poll. Now, what can Biden do about it? Well, stop relying on old tricks. They're no longer working. This war in Ukraine, for example, is not uniting Americans the way wars did in the past. People are not rallying around the flag, especially since the flag we're being asked to rally around, in this case, isn't even the Stars and Stripes. Since 2016, voters have been begging the administrations to focus on America and Americans' needs rather than dumping our money on foreign soil and endlessly increasing the defense budget. Americans want the government to govern in a way that benefits the middle class rather than their corporate donors. So focus on that. If Biden wants to win back Americans, he needs to ignore the outraged news media feeding Americans a steady diet of moral panic. He needs to ignore the questions coming in from the press corps whose sole job is to get clickbait headline material to keep their papers in business. The press is in a bubble, and it swallows up politicians and distracts them from doing their jobs, which is helping Americans live better lives. Instead, they've sucked them into thinking what Americans care about most is Trump's latest mean tweet and which carcass Putin is eating for breakfast. Americans care about their kids, their bank accounts, retirement, whether or not their rent is going to go up, how they're going to care for their aging parents, and when they're going to get out of the rat race of living paycheck to paycheck. If Biden wants his numbers to go up, he needs to focus 100% of his attention on Americans and the quality of the average American's life. So what do you guys think? Are we going to get Trump back in office? Is Biden going to learn the American people want solutions for our American lives, or are we going to get Trump in 2024?
If it's those two choices, I think we're going to get Trump in 2024. But, Biden's problem is how much can he do? Ryan talks a lot about how his troubles to actually get his agenda through Congress, right? Yeah. Some of that is a problem he wishes he didn't face, but he does face. I do think Trump would probably decrease in popularity if he was out there talking as much as he used to be, right? Him being off Twitter is like the best gift they can give to him, which
isn't that ironic?
Proves that, right? It proves the whole liberal censorship thing is exactly backfiring. But a question becomes: so I absolutely think Trump could defeat Biden. I think any other Republican probably has a better shot. But the question we have to ask is, because it really doesn't matter, right? Who's going to win more votes? It matters who's going to flip Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania. What candidate is going to prevail in those states? Is going to prevail over Biden where Trump faltered? And maybe that candidate is Trump. Maybe it's somebody else. I don't know.
Well, according to this poll, just to also bring this up, they did look at DeSantis against Biden, and they did find that pretty much any Republican, they didn't do as well. Trump actually still did the best against Biden. But they did say that they think if name recognition, Trump has the name recognition. So if there were a Republican with more name recognition, then maybe they would beat Biden as well. So I thought that was pretty interesting also, that DeSantis did not do as well against him as Trump did.
Yeah, he's not nearly as well known yet.
Right.
But I could be wrong, but my suspicion is that once that person becomes the candidate and has that name recognition, they'll have as good a shot as Trump, if not better.
Well, that's how this works. Like, we're in the news business, so we hear about Ron DeSantis all the time. But people who are just casual followers have probably a lot of, I'd be curious to see the name ID numbers. I assume a lot, certainly a majority of the country has, I think, heard of him by now. But how many people have an opinion beyond oh yeah, he's like a governor of Florida, or maybe he's a Republican guy. But once he becomes, if he runs, that's a giant parade of name recognition. Plus, then if he becomes the nominee, he'll have 100%.
What percentage of people do you think know that Ron DeSantis is the Republican governor of Florida?
I think you're down into the 20s at that point.
You
20s
think that
or
30s, 40s. I don't think it's more than half.
Maybe it pushes to 40 with all of the partisan people who really follow. But I mean, look at the cable news audience. It's Tucker has the biggest show in the country, and he gets 3 or 4 million. Mm-hmm. That's tiny.
Yeah, we forget.
Yeah, so.
Yeah,
but
unless Joe Rogan has DeSantis on his show,
yes,
right?
Then they'll know.
10 million. But I think that Trump now is a lot different than Trump 2 years from now, with 2 years of Republicans in the majority in Washington. And we don't know what's going to happen also over the next 2 years. Does inflation continue? Does it get hotter? Does it cool off and the economy grows and COVID goes away? A lot can happen. Do we all get nuked and die? A lot can happen.
Let's hope
between
not. But it is
then.
Amazing, that they have forgotten about that laundry list of, oh my gosh, all these terrible things that Trump did and said, and yet they would choose him over Biden. I mean, Biden's got to have some serious heart-to-hearts with himself and his administration at this point, if people are choosing Trump today.
With negative polarization, the MyPillow guy would be at mid-40s. So he might not be ahead of Biden, but it'd be like a coin toss.
Yeah, well, and you're right that the media made so much out of every single one of those things that you mentioned, Kim, and like you, I think a lot of those were legitimately very bad things Trump did, reasons not to vote for him. I do, unlike a lot of people in conservative media, I do ascribe significant blame to him for what happened on January 6th. But some of those other things, right, the media made way too much of. Russia stealing the election stuff, even sometimes his quotes being taken out of context, or how all hate crimes are somehow his fault because of the things he says. So there's a boy who cried wolf problem often in the media coverage of Trump. So.
Well, and that's why I think they're going to do everything they can to try to get Trump back into office. I mean, let's get
100%.
real, it was great for them, great for business.
They need him.
Yeah, so maybe they will keep him out of the spotlight so that people kind of romanticize him rather than remembering his foul mouth and then come election day. I mean, I don't know, but
it's the Joker and Batman from The Dark Knight. Kill you, what would I do without you? The Joker says.
Well,
Batman.
The good news about that is, I suppose, is that he can only run and win one more time, right? And then they would have to move on to somebody else. They'd be forced.
That's right.
Wild. All right, thank you, Kim. We'll have more Rising after this.